The Enlightenment period was a period where the world experienced a change in philosophical and intellectual knowledge during the 17th and 18th centuries. There were a great deal of figures during this period, but two of the most influential philosophers were Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. Both talked about political philosophy with different perspectives of their own. Right now, I will talk about both philosophers, their backgrounds, what they believed in, and the most prominent works in political philosophy. Thomas Hobbes was born in Malmesbury, Wiltshire, England, on April 5, 1588. He studied at Magdalen Hall in Oxford, and later worked as a tutor for the Cavendish family. This is where Hobbes read up on other philosophers, which shaped the way Hobbes thought. His best-known work is the 1651 book entitled Leviathan. Part 1 of the Leviathan, entitled Of Man, is where Hobbes creates a new science of human nature and human beings. Being a materialist, he explains that human behavior can be understood as just several types of matter in motion. Hobbes thought that we are composed of matter and that we could be classified into a mechanical structure of the following: senses, reason, imaginations, and organs. Hobbes also thought that we have bodily motions to indicate our appetites and aversions, our inclination to move towards or move away from objects. In Hobbes' human psychology, he also tells us about his moral relativism. Despite previous notions that have been said before, Hobbes describes human psychology without mentioning a greater good. This is because, given the inconsistency of human desires, a greater good cannot exist. Furthermore, Hobbes says that there is a greater evil, a fear of death. Since a greater good can't exist, the natural state of human beings will not be found in a political community that runs after the greater good. Yet, being outside of this community will lead us to be in a lawless condition and state. Considering human nature, the inconsistency of human desires, and the need for scarce supplies and materials to satisfy our desires, this state of nature is a war against all people, every man for himself. To add to Hobbes' human psychology, he also says that we desire the acknowledgement of others, which will create disputes and rivalries and competition, because we are dependent on other people to basically bestow their respect onto us, yet also yearning to see ourselves as more worthy and be more worthy and be more respected than other people. This mindset will guide our habit to not only overestimate our abilities, our skills and craft, but also make us be biased towards our own discernment and perception, which of course will lead to conflict and possibly war. Going back to what I previously said, the state of nature would be a war against all people, but why would life in a state of nature be so bad that every person will defend for only themselves? Hobbes thinks that we won't be able to work together when there is no central authority, beginning with the claim that there's a vital impartiality between human beings who all exist as matter and motion. He then goes on to say that there is no legitimate power. The state of nature will be a universal circumstance of instability, uncertainty, and insecurity, and that we will be battling for honor because we want to be recognized by others, as I previously stated. Now that we know Hobbes' view on living in a state of nature, let's look at the rights and the laws of nature. Before the time of Hobbes, when natural law was brought up in a discussion, it normally meant an objective measure that was inherent with nature. The contemporary law tended to highlight our personal rights and a right to self-preservation is what Hobbes calls a right of nature. Hobbes describes it as using any means necessary to protect our lives. Now, it's important to note that Hobbes' law of nature is different from rights of nature, in which laws of nature can be discovered through a reason, meaning that we should all come to the same conclusion if everyone is correctly reasoning. There's a party about what these laws actually are, but one way of thinking about them is to look at them as a logical manner through which we can attain peace and well-being. There are a plethora of laws that Hobbes listed. An example of one of them is that every person should seek peace. Others can be expressed in the classic saying, treat others how you want to be treated. Next is the social contract. Hobbes thinks that we need an authority to impose contracts, and without this authority, the contract would be repealed. And without a central authority to fulfill promises, we can't be sure that our safety is guaranteed. He thinks that it's crucial to exit the state of nature by making a contract, and therefore entering a political society, and live together under laws that are implemented by the sovereign. As a result, a large number of individuals come together in the artificial leader of the state, or the Commonwealth. Hobbes presents this state with the biblical term Leviathan, a term combined with the Hebrew words lava, meaning to connect or to join, and thanon, meaning serpent or dragon. In the end, the state is represented by the sovereign, and the sovereign is the person or people who have the power to impose laws. We soon see that Hobbes thinks that the sovereign should have near absolute power. Example is a monarch, and that they can do whatever they please. But why would someone agree to this? Hobbes' answer to this has a lot to do with his theory of authorization and representation. It basically states that the people allow the sovereign to act for them, literally seeing their actions as our own. In order for the sovereign to preserve the security of the people, the sovereign must have a wide range of powers. He also differentiates sovereignty by institution, which is people coming together to make a contract, and by acquisition, foreign power that conquers and forces their sovereign onto the people. Since the social contract depends on the agreement of people, if you're forced into agreeing with a new contract out of fear, then Hobbes says that it's still agreeing to the contract. Aside from not opposing the laws of the sovereign, the people could do whatever they please. But here's a contradiction. The sovereign has the power to put you to death if it's called for, which makes it not that different to a situation in a state of nature. The right to self-preservation is unable to be taken away, so it still exists inside the sovereign. People can't be forced to kill or injure themselves, but the sovereign can fairly put you to death. What Hobbes meant is that you can't expect any person to rebel against the instincts for self-preservation regardless of the power of the sovereign. He does suggest that it can be okay to go against certain rules of the sovereign, or allowed to oppose disgraceful and threatening officials if this opposition is not putting other people in danger. Furthermore, people in armed services are allowed to flee from war as long as they didn't sign up intentionally, or if the fate of the state is not at risk. To conclude this segment of Hobbes, let's move on to his view on religion. He thinks that religion is a vital component in life, and he sought to show that the traditional interpretations of the scripture were well suited with the recent findings in science. Instead, he might have worsened the state of affairs. What displeased his readers was that he treated the power of the church with less importance to the state, if that makes sense. Early on, he said that the state should discuss with the church the interpretations and meaning of Bible passages, but he noticed that a self-governing church might lead to conflict, and what he meant to do was to design and create a political system in which religion had a crucial role, but one that's also in tune with details of the scripture. Now on to John Locke. Born in Winton, Somerset, England on August 19, 1632, John Locke enrolled in the Christ Church in Oxford, where he discovered the works and publishings of modern-day philosophers like René Descartes and Francis Bacon. Locke graduated with a bachelor's and master's degree and moved into the home of Anthony Ashley Cooper to serve as his personal physician in London. It was there that Locke studied medicine under the guidance of Thomas Sydenham, who played a vital role in developing Locke's natural philosophy thinking. Around 1672 is when Locke wrote a large part of the two treatises of government. Locke's second treatise is where he talks about placing sovereignty into the hands of the people. He says that the people are born free and equal, and that we have the natural rights to life, liberty, and property in a state of nature. But to better preserve ourselves from our rights being infringed upon, we make a social contract with an unbiased authority to shape and build a political society, which will lead into an established government. The legislature should be the leading authority who will make decisions through a majority vote. If the government implements the power erratically, then it could justifiably be disbanded. Locke's account on the rightfulness of a government depended on the premise of the state of nature and the individuals making a social contract. He thought that his description of the state of nature was in compliance with Christian scripture. In fact, God played an important part in Locke's argument. His viewpoint is that God made us in a state of impartiality. For that reason, harming oneself or harming others will go against his plan. In addition, he thought that the state of nature was a condition of basic equality, where there was no supreme group, referring to all men living in a state of impartiality. If you read his text closely, you'll see that this is a concept that when people come across one another at any location that lacks a higher authority, they are in a state of nature. In his first portrayal of the state of nature, he stated that it wouldn't be a continual state of war, but rather the logical-minded people would be ready to keep the peace and respect the natural rights of other people. But the problem in this argument is the problem of partiality, meaning that we shouldn't be judged in our own case. Later on in the text, Locke provided a more bleak and cynical view of the dangers of the state of nature. It wasn't just solely impartiality, but rather every little difference would likely end in a state of war. Later on in the book, Locke gives 3 reasons to establish and form a political society. Firstly, there are no official laws, so people would have to agree on what is the law of nature. Secondly, there is no fair-minded judge with the power to sort out arguments and disputes, which makes people decide on their own cases. Lastly, there's no higher authority to carry out laws, and so Locke thought that people would agree that the situation was dissatisfying, which would make them shift the powers to a political society so they can create a government. In order for this to happen, though, there are 2 steps that need to be taken. There must be universal consent to come together and form a political society. And second, the people will take a majority vote on who will be the leader. Thus, a social contract is between a preformed political society and sovereign. The purpose of legitimate government is to protect the natural right to life, liberty, and property, and to penalize the people who transgress those rights of others. People must surrender the rights to punish criminals, but they won't surrender all of the rights to a sovereign. Locke's argument is that absolute monarchy was not consistent with civil society, which made it illegitimate. He stated that an absolute monarch was still in a state of nature in regards to the people. In truth, some argue that people are more unprotected in an absolute monarchy rather than in a state of nature. And this is mainly due to the fact that they have to face an immense power of a sovereign. Locke listed a few ways a government could be discontinued, and these include a foreign conquest, the legislature being changed, if the government exercises arbitrary power, or if the government lacks power to enforce these laws. For Locke, the most important one of these ways was the exercise of arbitrary power. A government should be terminated when it acts opposing to the people's trust. Once the previous government is disbanded and overthrown, the political community keeps the innate right to form a new government. Now that we talked about Hobbes and Locke's perspective for government, social contract theory, and other details, let's compare or contrast some of the ideas and theories. I'll start off with the social contract, and the views seen from a general, a more broad perspective are pretty much the same. Individuals create a social contract which prompts them to leave the state of nature and enter a political society. A key difference here is that in Locke's version of the contract, the sovereign is a party to the contract, whereas with Hobbes, the sovereign is a result of the contract. In addition, in place of Hobbes' single contract between citizens to obey and comply with the sovereign, Locke technically has two contracts. One between citizens and citizens, an example is respecting other people's natural rights, and the other being between citizens and the government. An example is the government can't exercise arbitrary power. Next, here are two examples of where they agree on government. They both agreed that the government did not originate from God, but rather it was created by man, and the power to rule over people came from the people themselves. Another example is that the government must be based on the social contract between the people and the government. A social contract can't be enforced if the people can't unanimously agree on the contract's details. Now on to the differences. There are a plethora of different views and opinions on government between Locke and Hobbes, but I'll just talk about the two main ones that I've seen. For Hobbes, the purpose of the government is to impose and keep law and order, and the people must surrender the right to the higher authority in exchange for protection. On the contrary, for Locke, the government was created to protect and to maintain our individual rights, and everybody was born with the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and property. By far, the biggest difference between Hobbes and Locke is that Hobbes supported absolute monarchy, while Locke argued against monarchy and instead supported democracy. Hobbes thought that the people could not be trusted to govern themselves because people would tend to prefer their own judgment and ideas over others, as I've said before. And for Locke, he believed that the people can govern themselves because he believed that people are good, and if given the correct and right information, they can make good decisions. Both Locke and Hobbes made valid arguments, and I can see both sides distinctly. In my honest opinion, I agree more with John Locke. The main factor for this opinion is because of Locke's natural and unalienable rights. In my point of view, these natural rights, life, liberty, and property, are a foundation of our lives. If a person obtains these natural rights, then they can search and find other facets in life more comfortably. Another reason is because the people will decide who would lead them through a majority vote, which is, in my opinion, the most equitable and fair process of choosing a leader. Furthermore, if the leader or the government starts to act tyrannically and more oppressive, we could overthrow the government and form a new one. Whereas with Hobbes, he thinks the government should have near absolute power, making it more difficult to overthrow the government. I feel that there's more of a risk following Hobbes' idea, solely because the government will have a higher chance of abusing the power, and they have a chance to not be penalized for it. Despite this, I do agree with Hobbes when he says that the right to self-preservation is unable to be taken away. If anyone is putting our lives in danger, we must be able to protect ourselves. I also agree when Hobbes says that one of our laws of nature is that everyone should seek peace. Peace is a fundamental aspect in our life, and I believe that everyone should have the right to find peace in their life. To conclude, the information above, Thomas Hobbes and John Locke were two of the most prominent political philosophers during the Enlightenment period. Thomas Hobbes thinks that the government should be led by a monarch whose objective is to keep law and order. On the contrary, John Locke thinks that the government should be led by a person who is elected by the people through a majority vote, and the objective is to preserve the rights of individuals. Even though the ideas contrasted with each other, the views on the state of nature and the social contract theory help change the way we see a political society.